So recently, Forbes had an article with Ian Hazzikostas in regards to Crucible of Storms, Rise of Ashara, and then something that they did end up hitting on in this article is Beguiling. And right here, you can see on screen Wowhead's coverage of what this Beguiling affix and what Ian ended up saying about it. So let me read it out for you. So Beguiling is the Season 3 Mythic Plus affix and is currently not testable in the 8.2 PTR. In this interview, we learned that Beguiling adds different types of handmaidens to pulls, Shadow, Arcane, and Frost, and they'll be presented in a variety of trash packs. The interview also reminded players that Season 3, including the Internal Palace and new affix, will not start immediately in Rise of Ashara. It will be several weeks later. So that's just like Wowhead's kind of like TLDR, what to expect, and then they set it up to where Ian Hazzikostas can say what he wants to say here. So he says, the question is, what is the new Season 3 Mythic Dungeon affix like? And Hazzikostas' response is, Beguiling represents the minions of Queen Ashara invading dungeons of Kul Tiras and Zandalar. There are 3 different types of handmaidens that will be represented in varieties of pulls in different configurations from week to week. There's one that has Shadow Power, one that has Arcane, and one that has Frost. They have fun, different effects that will change the way that you approach certain pulls, and they will make it so that certain pulls that you probably haven't done in the last 5 months because you always skip them, you might actually have to do. So there's a lot to unpack with what Ian ends up saying just in his couple sentences here. So first off, I want to hit on this thing that he says here, configurations from week to week. We saw this with Infested, and it ended up being not only a problem for the high-end community, but it ended up being a problem for like the casual player base in general, because one, it gives you less choice. So that's like a major issue that I have with how Ian ended up representing this right here is choice of whether or not you actually have to do the pack or if it is like a choice that you're going to end up having. In addition to that, configurations from week to week, you actually have to have like a very clear understanding of what you should be looking to do. There is no like default route that you can just default back to, and it's going to be harder for the casual player base while making optimizations from the high end very challenging overall. So the lower end community that just wants to get 110 done a week, or maybe some alt play or something like that, is going to be they're going to struggle to set up strategies in general and have that base that they need, while the upper end is going to have to be able to innovate more, and they're going to have to be really more in tune with what they're being looking for from week to week. And I think overall, I think Reaping was better in the sense of like you could always kind of control where you're going to proc your Reaping. I know some affixes ended up not letting that be doable, like you end up having teaming alterations and other things, but by and large, you do have control of whenever you proc your Reaping. All right, so let's move on to the next part. We have this that says, they have fun, different effects that will change the way you approach certain pulls. They'll make it so that certain pulls you probably haven't done within the last 5 months, you always skip them, you might have to actually do. So that's going to be interesting depending on how they end up doing it. There's a multiple ways that they can approach this. This can actually be fun, like Ian says. Either the packs could give like multiple, like double count, or they could give you like a damage buff for 60 seconds in relationship to like increase the you do like extra shadow damage, you do extra arcane damage, you do extra frost damage, or like you get a bonus modifier that like increases your damage for 60 seconds or whatever after you kill the handmaiden. Alternatively, the packs could just the handmaiden specifically could just be required as a part of like the count process that you have to do in order for you to be forced into pulling all those packs and making sure that they get done. Just having them as like an additional condition that you have to meet before the dungeon ends up ending. So it really kind of depends on how they set it up. I think if it's actually fun, like Ian says that they should be, then it can actually be set up well. I think the reason that Reaping was so successful overall is that people like big damage numbers, right? They want to see themselves doing lots of DPS, and Reaping kind of facilitated that because not only did Reaping spawn a ton of mobs, but you could pull those mobs into other things. You could pull them into bosses, you could facilitate them into other trash packs or other things. So that was why Reaping was fun. So if they actually take the good parts of Reaping and they move it into Beguiling here, with where it's like there ends up having some positive effect of it, it can actually be really well off. Alternatively, if it ends up being like Infested, where it changes your pathing week to week, it ends up slowing down the dungeon, ends up lugging you down, it ends up being unfun, then I think we're going to have a major issue with Beguiling here. I think it has to be looking to be enticed as opposed to forced. There's nothing wrong with pulling the Colossus in a Taldazar. There's nothing wrong with pulling mini bosses in some of the Shrine of the Storm or whatever, right? As long as it's enticing as opposed to mandatory. I think that's where the issue ends up lying for me personally. And overall, I hope that Beguiling ends up being great because we could actually see a great season of Mythic Plus if it does end up really strong. Overall, seasonal affixes and then just how many affixes in general will end up lugging you down if Beguiling ends up slowing you down by a substantial amount could actually be obnoxious, because you have the level 4 affixes of like bursting, bolstering, and then sanguine, which ends up slowing you down. And then you have the level 7 affixes, which have like explosive and stuff like that, which end up slowing you down. If we have another one on top of that in Beguiling that just compounds the problem of just lugging you down and slowing you down, we could see a lot of people lend significant issue to it overall. So overall, I really do hope Beguiling ends up being great. I hope it ends up being fun like Ian Hazzikostas ends up saying here. But I've just wanted to lend my concerns here. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Peace, guys.